Welcome to another episode of We Don't Die. I'm your host, Sandra Champlain, author of the international best-selling book called We Don't Die, A Skeptic's Discovery of Life After Death. And just a reminder, my home base is WeDon'tDie.com, where you can always find our free Sunday gathering with medium demonstration included. Join one of our medium classes to really experience and explore the power of your own soul and so much more. We hear about the difference a good teacher can make in our lives, but I've never heard a story quite like this. Jess Kerzen has enjoyed a variety of roles in many educational settings, from specialist speech and language teacher to head of English, with a particular interest in working with neurodiverse students, particularly those with autistic spectrum perception and communication challenges. Many years ago, a unique bond formed between herself as a school teacher and a 6-year-old autistic boy named Asher. While Jess taught Asher to communicate by speaking, Asher taught Jess telepathy, which was his very first language. Their journey together now spans 25 years of exploring psychic and supernatural abilities. Jess is the author of the book, A Mind Beyond Words, My Decades of Discovery with an Extraordinary Guide. You can find out more about her and her story at the website ashertree.com. Jess, welcome to We Don't Die.
Thank you so much for having me, Sandra. I'm very excited to be here.
Oh, I'm so excited too. I've listened to some interviews with you, and it's a story like I've never heard before. So if you wouldn't mind, just to introduce yourself, where are you coming to us from today? Where do you live? And a little bit about your history, and then we can find out about Asher.
Sure. I live in the United Kingdom. I'm down in the southwest in a little town called Glastonbury in Somerset. And I've lived here for a while, but I've lived all around the UK, really, in different places. I used to teach, as you said in your introduction. I'm now retired. Yeah, I think my experience with Asher, with this little 6-year-old boy, left me feeling like I had two lives, if that makes sense.
It does.
I have my normal teaching, mum, friend, everything life carrying on. But as a sideline, I had this friendship that developed with Ash. Started off as a very little boy, but as he grew older, we kind of stuck together, and he'd chosen me as somebody who was going to be his support while he was young. But as the years have gone by, he's now my teacher, and I'm his student, and we work together, as you say, through telepathy.
Well, take us back to how that began. He was a student, his parents brought you to a school. How did that begin? Because this is such an extraordinary story that doesn't happen. Well, I've never heard of it before, actually. So how does it begin? What was it like for you? How were you introduced?
It began strangely normally. So, if that makes sense, I was just expecting him to be another pupil in my class. I had these 10 little children who all had some sort of difficulties with speech and language, and he fitted the bill perfectly. He didn't have very good speech. His muscles in his mouth didn't work very well, and he also had a diagnosis of the autistic spectrum. So he wasn't great at conversation and that kind of thing, but I was used to teaching things like that. I've been doing it for years. And then when he had been in my class a few weeks, it finally dawned on me that several of my lessons have been going quite badly wrong, and I hadn't been able to put my finger on why. And I realized that he was actually playing mind games with me, which sounds preposterous for a small child with a statement of special educational needs. But he was very devious, very clever, and he was messing up my lessons in various ways. And when I grasped that it was him, I took him aside and said, "Why are you doing this? You seem, like a sort of hardworking little boy. Why would you want to mess up my lessons?" And then he just looked at me and his eyes were shining. And he explained as in the best way that he could, because he didn't have much language, that he had been trying what he called his tests on various adults in his life for several years, since he was about 3 or 4, because he knew that before he was born, he'd made a soul agreement with another soul that they were going to work together. And all he had to do when he arrived here on this planet in his body was to find that person. And he knew it was going to be female, and he knew it was going to be some sort of authority figure. And so he tried his mum, and he tried his aunt, and he tried staff at the school and the preschools and places that he went to. And he was looking for the person who figured out that it was him messing things up. And I was the person who did that. And so he just looked at me and said, "So it's you." That was my introduction to working with Ash.
Well, when we hear children who have these stories of imaginary friends, and through all my years of investigation, they've seen pictures and their deceased grandparents and things like that, it's easy for an adult to just brush that off. And it takes someone who's open. And did you have any ideas of afterlife or psychic or any of those spiritual things before meeting him? Were you open to those things?
I was open, yes. I wouldn't put it any stronger than that. I hadn't got any experience of it myself. I'd had a few incidents in my life where sort of odd things had happened, and I thought, I think that's a bit more than a coincidence. But nothing had prepared me for what he was going to come up with, and I'd never given any thought to pre-life contracts or whatever you'd call them. But once he told me, it kind of made sense. I didn't think he was imagining it. I didn't think he was just some kid who got this funny idea in his head, but I really believed him, and I'm very glad I did.
It takes a very special person to be a teacher and to work with these kids that are on the spectrum and have that love and know that even if the communication isn't fully there, there's real people behind those eyes. So I just commend you for being that for him, really, and for the other kids that I'm sure you've made a difference in many lives. So Jess, how did he begin to teach you? And you said there were 10 kids. I'm assuming you worked obviously one-on-one individually with these kids. It wasn't like a classroom setting that he was doing this in. But how did he start to work with you to teach you this communication?
Well, we did have it it was a classroom setting, but it was only 10 children, and we had 3 adults in the class to 10 children. So there was a lot of one-to-one work, and there was a bit of mixing them together. And my job was really putting them together to try and get them used to having conversations, taking turns, know when it was your turn to talk and somebody else's, that kind of thing. Asher kept his teaching of me, if you like, to when we were working one-to-one, most of the time anyway. He told me that he was telepathic when he was still quite small, and I remember being quite shocked by that because he had this wicked little grin on his face, and I said, "You mean you can read my mind?" And you can imagine, can't you, as a teacher, thinking that one of your pupils is actually able to read what you're thinking, not just what you're saying.
Right.
That was quite scary at first. And he just burst out laughing when I said, okay, that's going to be interesting then. Sometimes he worked with the other children in the class. There was a couple of others who seemed to want to help him to teach me the telepathy thing. And I couldn't pick up every child in the room, but nearly all of them had some degree of this kind of way of communicating with each other because they hadn't got spoken language to use. So if they wanted to talk to each other, that's what they were doing. And I hadn't realised that in the years I've been working in this placement until Asher joined my class. But yeah, they could all talk to each other, and some of them talked to me through telepathy. So that was exciting.
Did he give you proof that he was actually reading your mind? What had you be sold that, oh my gosh, this is real? He's understanding me and I'm understanding him.
Yeah, and he was very good at, how would I put it, beaming thought or beaming emotions to me. So I could just be getting on with my daily stuff, and suddenly I'd feel anxiety or I'd feel fear or something. And I got to know when it was coming from him. I knew it wasn't myself, but he had this way of, first of all, starting off with feelings and his emotions, and he used it quite well. If he wanted my attention, he wouldn't just sort of wave his hand in the air. He'd just beam these thoughts to me. And then as his speech got better, which it did over the years, he was able to start telling me some of the things that he knew. And he didn't know how he knew them. He just had this innate ability to pick up information, to pick up knowledge from what he calls the realms, which is another dimension. And so he used that information to share with me all sorts of things. I mean, I can remember one time I had a book I'd been reading and I was trying to explain to him what had been in this book. It was about mystical, esoteric stuff, and it was quite complicated. And I said to him, I've got a bit of a grasp of it, but it's actually at the very limits of my understanding. And he got bored with me trying. I mean, he was only a kid then, but he got bored with me trying to explain it to him. So he said, just put the book out on the flat of your hand. And I did. And then he took his own hand, put it on top of the book, left it there for a second or two, and then he just smiled and nodded and gave me a complete summary of all the stuff that I'd already read and the bit I hadn't got to yet in the book. And he could just explain it to me.
That's incredible. I've done so many remote viewing experiences of my own. And what really convinced me is to have a magazine in front of me and just write down what I thought were images in the magazine. And they came to my mind so fast, Jess. And then it was something like 95% of the images that I saw in my mind were in that magazine.
Wow.
It was incredible. It was just, I'd been playing with remote viewing after doing a workshop with the great Russell Targ. And I also know from people I've interviewed that there's children being taught to use their psychic ability, having blindfolds on. They can play ball, play catch. They can put together very intricate beads and jewelry, picking out colors, all the while being blindfolded. So this is available to all, even with the psychic and medium classes that we do, realizing, like you say, what's us and what's them, what is coming from our own memory and our own imagination to images that we're picking up of, say, somebody's deceased loved one or their soul communicating. So I know it's all possible, but to hear a story of a young boy who's come in and he's looking for his teacher and then he's found her. So tell us more about how the relationship developed, because you were his teacher, but he was yours as well.
Yeah. In the normal run of things, as I'm sure you know, in a school, you wouldn't be teaching the same children for very long. And I wasn't expecting to be his teacher for much more than a couple of years. And then he'd go back to mainstream. But it didn't quite work out that way because while he was in my class as a very little boy, his mother became ill. And his mum and I became quite good friends, actually, over the years. And when he was just 9, she sadly passed away. And just before she died, she'd said to me, look, he is really going to struggle because he needs somebody in his life who's going to be stable. His dad understands him to a degree, but she said even when he's no longer in your class or no longer in your school even, could you keep up your friendship with him? Could you keep an eye on him? Because going through his teenage years, he's going to find it tough. And I said, absolutely, yeah, I'll be a lifelong friend to him. And while she'd been ill, I'd been taking him on little trips out in the weekends. We didn't tell the rest of the people at school. I'd just quietly take him out. We'd go on little trips and train rides and stuff like that. And so, after she died, he said, can we keep up doing those trips? Because I really, really like that. I said, yes, of course. So right the way through from after he moved out of high school, right through his teenage years, we every so often would meet up, go and have a day out together, weekends, school holidays. And I think I was the only person he could talk to about the experiences he was having. Nobody in his family was very open to it, and he didn't feel safe telling schoolmates because he wanted to appear normal in front of them. And so we just had this secret life, if you like, where he would share his visions and his knowledge with me. And that carried on till he was about 16 or 17.
Well, I'd like to find out more about that, but due to the nature of our show, we have a lot of parents here and folks that have loved ones who have passed. And at such a young age for Asher to lose his mom. Was there any sense through Asher that his mom survived death? Any communication from her, from beyond, anything like that?
There was, but it came to me, not to Asher.
Okay.
So, yeah, she didn't, when she was dying, have any belief in an afterlife. She didn't believe she was going to survive in any way. And Asher's father had said to him, very sensibly, trying to explain to a little child, he said, well, your mummy's body will die, but her mind will go to heaven. That's how he explained it, which is what Asher believed. So, it was a few years after she died, and there'd been an unfortunate occurrence because he'd been, as a little boy, sorry, I'm jumping about a bit here, but I'll get there. When he was waiting for her to die, basically, he just got to the stage where he couldn't bear to go into the hospice. He couldn't bear to see her towards the very end of her life. It was too stressful for him. It was too hard. His autism had just shut him down completely. And one of the things she'd said to me at that final chat was, can you make sure he comes and says goodbye to me before I pass? Because he's going to beat himself up for that if he doesn't. And so I said, yes, I'd do all I could to get him to. So I went into school the next day and I took him aside and I said, look, your mum hasn't got very much longer. I think it's time you do need to go and just say your farewells to her. And so he said, yeah, all right. He'd go after school that day. But when he got to the hospice, she'd sunk into a coma and she was unresponsive. And so this poor little kid sat by her bedside and told her he loved her and gave her all the, things that he wanted to say, but there was no sign that she was understanding him. And he came away from that feeling that he had missed his opportunity, if you like, that his mum had died without knowing that he really loved her deep down. And that affected him. So when he was, I suppose, about 11 or 12 and starting to go through puberty and finding life difficult anyway, he was still mentally beating himself up for the way he treated his mum. And I knew, deep in my heart, I knew that she had heard every word that he'd said, but I couldn't convince him of that. And then I've never had any mediumship experience. I'd never been to a medium at that point in my life, so it was completely new to me, but I explain it in A Mind Beyond Words in a lot of detail. It's quite a long story, but it's quite a clever one because I started to get excruciating pains in one of my knees. And I only got these pains when I was doing something connected with spirit. One time it was when I was listening to a radio show about spiritual mediums. Another time was when I went for some spiritual healing. And it didn't happen any other time, but it was at these times that I got this pain like there was a vice gripping my left knee. And I just could not work out what was going on. And then while I thought about it, I thought there's some link to spirit. And I thought, oh, maybe there's a spirit trying to reach me and has mistaken me for a medium or something, which just felt quite creepy to me at that point in my life. And then I thought, well, I don't know anybody who's passed over who'd be doing that. And then I thought, oh, hang on, what about Asha's mum? And so her name was Nina, or in the book I've called her Nina. I've changed all the names of the book because it's a true story. But her real name, as well as Nina, could be shortened to Ni, N-I. And I thought, that pain is in my knee. And it's in my left knee. And as soon as that came into my head, I could feel this tiny little playful squeeze on my knee. And I thought,
Nice.
this is her. She is reaching me. And that's exactly her sense of humor. That's just the sort of wacky things she'd do. And so I thought, okay, so Nina is trying to reach me. And when I got the chance, I got my crystal pendulum out because by this time I'd started to really get interested in spiritual and psychic phenomena. And I sort of held the pendulum and said, are these sensations coming from Nina? And it started to nod back and forth very, very clearly. So I said, okay, so you need to make contact with me. And I got another yes. Is it something to do with your family? Yes. Is it something to do with Asha? Yes. And at that point, I thought, no, this isn't going to work. I can't just ask yes and no questions all the time. I'd be here forever. And so I made myself a kind of chart with segments like slices of pizza, if you like, and I put something, one of the family members or somebody who was close to them on each one, and then I did a second chart that looked like what we now call emojis, so I had different emotions on it. And using that, I got a sort of message, and she was actually at that point concerned about a bunch of kids he'd got in with at school who were slightly older children, and they were leading him astray, and he was a little bit vulnerable and gullible, and she wanted me to step in. And so we sorted that out, and I thought, oh, well, perhaps that's it. But then she started to contact me again, and this time I had the sense to make myself an alphabet sheet so that I could actually use my pendulum to pick up her messages using the alphabet. So I could, and she seemed to be perfect at it. She could make my pendulum swing to any letter of the alphabet, and I'd be writing them down as she did it. And I was a member of a spiritual development circle, and I mentioned this to the lady in charge of that. And I happened to say to her, oh, what I really wish is that I could make Asha understand that she was able to hear all the things that he said to her when she was passing. And this lady just looked at me and rolled her eyes and said, for goodness sake, don't you see why you've been given this gift? She said, go home now. And she virtually shoved me out of the door. Go home now, settle down, connect with Nina, and ask her to dictate to you exactly what happened in that final meeting between her and Asha. And it was the longest message we'd ever done. It took me absolutely ages to put it all together. And then I wrote it out neatly afterwards. And it was so detailed, Sandra. It was, not just he said this, he said that. She even mentioned she heard his dad knock on the door and say, "Are you all right, son?" And I put it all in there and then put it into an envelope. And I called Asher up and I said, "I've got something rather special to give you." And he said, "All right." Then we met up and I said, "Right, I want you to prepare yourself for a shock. It's a message from your mum." Because I told him that I had got this contact with her. And he'd been quite pleased about it, to know that there was, she was still around, if you like. But he'd never taken any particular interest in what she was saying to me. I think mostly because he didn't like the fact that she told me about these mates of his that
Right.
trouble. But he took this from me and read the message, and just the look on his face, I think it changed both our lives, that experience. So yeah, that's how she gave us proof that she was still there and she was still watching out for him, and she wanted him to have closure about her parting.
Oh, that is a special story. A good medium reading with that evidence and those feelings of love can give people their life back. There's so much guilt and regret and all those things tied in when someone passes, but to know that they're healthy, they're alive, they're watching over us. That's why I do this, Jess. This is it. It's to give people life. All right, now there's a whole bunch in that book. So you and Asher developed quite the relationship, and he tapped into things that we human beings normally don't tap into. Do you want to talk about some of the discoveries and things that you learned and some of the wonderful things that he's shared with you?
Yeah, I mean, what I've done when I wrote Mind Beyond Words, the first three parts of the book, if you like, are biographical. So there's a part about how we first met. There's another part about all those little train rides and the things we did up to his teens. And then there's another part about what he did once he was grown up. And by that time, we were living in very different parts of the country. So that's all about the remote viewing and his working with crystals and working with dowsing rods and so forth. And the final part of the book, I have more or less handed over to Asher and said, "Okay, so there you are, going to these amazing realms. You move out of body, you find all these things out. Just share them. So tell us." And it was wonderful because I was able to sit there and say, "Well, I want to understand about creation, or I want to understand about life and death and reincarnation, or I want to understand whatever." And he would just go to what he called his beginningless and endless library, which some I think would call the Akashic Records. And he would bring this information back and put it into our telepathic bubble and pass all that information on to me.
What kind of things, Jess, as far as the purpose of life and why we're here, did he say?
Oh, that's a big question.
Oh, of course. We go for the big ones.
Yeah, we do. He says that we choose before we're born not everything that's going to happen in our life. That would make it completely pointless. But we have a sort of general plan of what experiences we'd like to explore. And then it's entirely up to our human self to do what we want with those experiences. So in human terms, some of those experiences would seem very bleak, like we want to experience what it's like to live in a war zone, or we want to experience what it's like to, deal with being dominated or whatever. And over a series of lifetimes, because he's very insistent that there are a series of lifetimes, it's not just a one off, we can explore different aspects of whatever our chosen speciality is, if you like. And he said that we get nudges. He calls them subtle light navigation, which is kind of like GPS. Our soul tells us which way we should go, and we can choose to follow that, or we can choose to turn off and not follow that, because we've got free choice in this life. But it's the idea that we can explore things and we're getting the opportunities to. For example, I think the fact that I fetched up teaching in that particular class, and then he was born in that particular town with speech and language difficulties, meant that we were going to meet. So we got that opportunity. But I had free choice. I could have just turned around and said to him, no, I'm sorry, I'm not interested in your funny ideas, just sit down and do your work. But I didn't. So, yeah, the idea is that we go through this lifetime, we take in our experience, we learn from it, we have all sorts of things happen to us. People come into our lives and give us little clues and hints. By the end of the lifetime, we've built up a huge amount of information, a huge amount of knowledge, which we can take with us to the afterlife and say, okay, I used to know just this much, but now I've learned even more. I've learned this much. And then we can decide whether we want to come back for another lifetime to explore even more of that subject, or if we want to move on to other ways.
What a kid, young man. Does he describe the afterlife or different realms that are available once we pass?
He said it's difficult to describe because it's not a place, because you're outside of time and space. But he said there are different levels. For example, when he was going through a very dark time in his teens, he started moving out of body into quite a threatening sort of place. And he used to call that the plazas, and it didn't sound a nice place at all. It was very dark, and he was coming across other beings there. And he said it seemed to be where people connect when they aren't ready to move on towards the light, but they are just out of body. Perhaps they've been abusing drugs or something like that, and they've just got themselves into quite a dark position, and they've got to work through all that mess before they can move to the next level up. And he said there's levels that he doesn't reach himself because obviously he's still alive, but he's aware that there are realms that are much lighter and much more beautiful. But the parts he visits seem to be to do with learning and to do with gaining knowledge, gaining light is what he calls it, that he can then bring down to earth. And between the two of us, we can pass that on so that other people can find out more about his perspective on it.
I like that, gaining light. I think about getting brighter and brighter the more experiences that we have. Talk about love, maybe being of service, helping others. Is there messages that have come through him about, while we're here, being of service to others and sharing that love?
Yeah, he said a really lovely thing. We were talking about truth and what's true and what isn't true, because there's all the different religions and the scientists who say that religion's not true. And I said, we need to address this. And he said, yes, we do. We need to talk about it. He said, the thing is, with truth, it doesn't necessarily stay the same. He said, humanity is moving in a kind of spiral. And he said, what was true for the ancient Romans or what was true for the Aztecs was true for them at the time, but it isn't true for us because we've just got different levels of truth. And he said there's just one truth that goes through the whole lot, that no matter where you are on the timeline, from the sort of beginnings of humanity right through to now and beyond, it's the golden rule, the treat others the way you'd like to be treated. And he said that never goes away. That's what people should be aspiring to, because if you treat other people the way you want to be treated, you can't go wrong, because that way you're always caring for everybody.
Beautiful words. I just heard a near-death experience yesterday of a woman, and when she met, whether it was Jesus or that figure that was light and divine, she was ready to go. She said, I did enough here on earth. And she was giving this being a whole list of all the good things that she had done. And he said to her, but did you love unconditionally? The love that you feel here, did you give that to your husband, to your children, to others? And the message was, there's still more work to be done, that we as human beings to really learn to love our enemies, love each other, see people as divine souls. And I think for me, that was really humbling, that no matter what we do, there's more work to be done.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. Yeah. And it is humbling, isn't it? Because we do have to stop and think hard about that.
Definitely. Now, Asher, now I would imagine is he late 20s, 30s, somewhere in that range?
He's early 30s. Yeah, he's in his early 30s.
And he's a grown man now, and he's living his life. And I know you change names just to keep it private for that, so he can go on to live his life. Are you still in connection with him, or not so much these days?
Yes, we are in contact still. He won't meet up with me. He's kind of split into two. There's the physical him, who does, as you say, just go about his everyday life. He's a very quiet, very introverted guy. He doesn't like to mix with other people. He has a job and he goes to work, but then he comes home and he just, from what I can gather, shuts himself in his room. And I keep in touch with him via messaging on our phones. And every weekend, he doesn't like me to talk to him in the week because he likes, just to keep it to a routine. But every weekend, I'll send him a little message just saying what I've been doing, just in everyday life. Hey, I went out to the countryside, I did this and I did that. Sometimes send him a few little videos of where I've been, because he's not able to go out on his train rides anymore, and I think he must be missing that. And he gets back to me with single words. That's all I get from him. So I'll say, have you had a good week? And he'll just say, yeah. What's the weather like there? It was wet. So he isn't interested in having a conversation in physical terms. He doesn't want to meet up, even if I'm in his city. He doesn't want to see me. He doesn't want to have any visual contact. But then this other side of him, the telepathic side, wherein almost every evening we're in contact with one another. So there's still that very close contact in that respect. And I just have to accept the two sides of Asher. And much as I'd love to see him and talk to him and be there and share a meal together or something, that's not going to happen at the moment. He's not in that space, and he just wants to keep his world compartmentalized into these two separate selves.
And that's the nature of growing up, isn't it? I've watched my nieces and nephews just grow up, and they're independent people. And as much as we had that real close relationship when they were children, it's different now. But we certainly wish them well, and we know that those things we gave them in the early years were necessary and good. And trust, that's what we got to do, is trust. How do you know when you say you connect with him that it's him? Is it a certain feeling that comes over you?
Yes, it is a feeling. I mean, I'm not so telepathic that I pick up everybody. I certainly can't walk down the street and know what other people are thinking. It is purely a link between Asher and myself. So when I'm preparing to work with him, we have a set time in the evening, and I do meditate. I go into a space about half an hour beforehand where I'm pushing aside the whatever's happened in the day, phone calls and people I've met, anything like that. So I'm trying to empty my mind as much as I can. And then I tune into him, and I put my hands together, like in the prayer position, and I put them out in front of me. And then by themselves, they just start to move apart. And sometimes they just move apart a little way, and sometimes they just whoosh right out as wide as they can. And that's giving me a clue of how close and how strong my contact with Asher is on that particular evening. And then I'll sit down with a notebook. I don't go anywhere near any tech equipment. I leave all of the phones and the computer and things aside. And I just sit with a notebook, pen, wait. I'll ask him a question, and his answer will come to me, and I'll write that down. And sometimes he'll want to tell me something, but I'll just know it in my mind. Sometimes I see it in pictures, sometimes I see it in the mind movies, sometimes I get it in kind of words, although I don't actually hear the words the way I'm hearing your voice, but I know the words. It's the best way I can describe it. And that's how it happens.
It's soul to soul communication. It really is. And in the beginning, when I first started getting into medium lessons and things, I didn't know what was happening. But then there were times that I actually felt like I was the other person. I could have memories that didn't belong to Sandra, and I would have a person that I'd never met before, and suddenly I'm feeling intense love for them. And these stories and pictures that are coming to my mind, and telling the person these stories, yes, these are things they did together. So to feel that connection, and I think it's so good. And we teach medium classes, just not for people. Yeah, sure, they can go become a medium, absolutely. But I think as divine souls, to get that experience of what it feels like to be working with the power of your soul, to be able to communicate, to be able to perceive those subtle images and words and feelings. Like you said, it's not words like I'm speaking to you, although some people have that, but it's just this knowing, So I always encourage people to dabble in that, just to see how it feels. It's a wonderful opportunity to realize that we are these divine souls. And even with remote viewing, how could you know things that are happening on the other side of the world or anything when
Yeah.
you think you're just here in this room? Could you speak a little bit about consciousness? I know that's another big word, but I believe, obviously, that we are not just what's in our skin, that we're so much more.
Yeah. Asher says that if the way he showed it to me, because this wasn't speaking, this was a real image that came to me of a pillar of light. He just showed me this huge pillar of light. And he said, that is your consciousness. And it stretches right from source right down to the depths of the earth, or wherever you could go in the other direction. And it's got every frequency that there is. And he said, somewhere on that pillar of light is your human self. And it's just like if that pillar had, if you could fit a bead onto that pillar, that bead would be the human bit, and that covers the sort of visible light spectrum. So you're going from red to violet, like the chakra colours. And he said, beyond that, you've got ultraviolet going up, and you've got infrared going down, and then you've got lots of others that our scientists have discovered. But he said, there's your consciousness is in that pillar of light. Sometimes it comes in, obviously, when we're what we call conscious, it comes into the human body. But there are other times, like when you're in a coma or when you're having a near death experience, the doctors will look at you and say, oh, this person's unconscious. What they mean is that that person's brain is not where their consciousness is located at that point. Their consciousness has moved out of that, it's moved beyond the physical body, and it's in other places. When we sleep at night, when we go into deep sleep, again, the doctors say, oh, well, there's virtually no brain activity. So, do they call it, I can't remember, the theta state or something, isn't it? There's different states of mind
Yes.
and they can check them all out. But delta, I think, is the one where the doctors say you're sort of unconscious. But Asher says, no, that's when your consciousness is at its most expanded. It's just not having to squeeze itself into the human brain. But then when you're going about your daily life, obviously you need to have a lot of your consciousness stuck in your human body so you can go about the things you've got to do on a day-to-day basis.
And just incredible. How important is the meditation and slowing down, do you think?
I think it is important. I mean, what Asher says is that if everybody could get to an alpha state, which is the meditative state, isn't it, where we go when we're meditating, then that's the optimum place to be because we're in touch with physicality. We've got a degree of grounding there. We're not completely away with the fairies, but at the same extent, we've also got this closer link to spirit, to our souls. And you don't get that sitting, working away in an office and all the rest of it. You get it when you're out in nature or when you're relaxing or when you're just somewhere that's, much more lovely.
Yes. Jess, I wanted to ask you, you've worked with other children as well. Working with Asher certainly has taught you that there can be language without human words. What difference has it made with your relating to the other kids, the neurodiverse kids, the kids on the autistic spectrum? Because we all see these lovely children and they may not have speech or they may look a little different. But what has this all taught you about these children and ultimately people?
It's taught me that every single one of them has got this telepathic communication. In fact, what I've been learning, even since I wrote A Mind Beyond Words, and because my research is ongoing, if you call it research, the studies I'm doing, I'm finding a lot of people I meet. I haven't actually worked as a teacher with non-speaking children, but when I'm selling my book, say I've got a book signing or something like that, I'll have people come up to me and say, I work with non-speaking adults. I work with children who've got profound learning difficulties as they're categorized. And they have this ability. They are able to use this kind of telepathic skill, and not just with the occasional adult who's able, the occasional sort of teacher or speaking adult who's able to pick it up, but amongst themselves, with each other, even with people beyond their direct circle who we, can't see. I had it described to me recently by one of these people as it's like they've got this subscription only TV channel and only the people who've paid the subscription can watch that particular channel. The rest of us, we might have a TV set, but we can't get to see the shows on that channel because we haven't got that particular frequency on our TVs. And I was told that the more challenged the physical body is, the more aware they are of spirit. they're not having to bother in this lifetime with doing the sort of going to the grocery store or doing the washing up or all the nitty-gritty that we get caught up in. They have this freedom just to focus on bringing more light into our planet, on connecting with what Asher would call the realms and bringing the light to us.
Very special children. There's a term you use in your book called Astral Envelope. I love that. Do you want to share what that is? And then I thought of an idea we could all do.
Oh, the Astral Envelope is, I don't know whether it was me or Asher who came up with that. I think it was a sort of joint thing, but it's the way he puts stuff across to me. So if you imagine somebody gave you an envelope and it was filled with pictures and little bits of writing and maybe objects and different textures of stuff, or perhaps a plant from the garden, anything that helped you to understand. Say you put together an envelope of what it's like to live where I live, and you wanted to send it to somebody else. So you might put in some cuttings of plants, and you might put in a photo, and you might put in a little description, all sorts of stuff like that, even bits of fabric from, offcuts from curtains or whatever. And that's the way he puts his information across to me. So it's an envelope of what I was saying earlier, where I'll sometimes get a mind movie and sometimes I'll get a word or drop in, and various multi-sensory ways of being. It can even be smells, and I've never had tastes, but I don't see why it couldn't be tastes and sounds and feelings of motion, sort of rising up or something being squished down. So yeah, that's an astral envelope.
I love it. My idea that I had is just when we set aside time to talk to our own loved ones, to just have that visual of them sending you the envelope, and whether you have pen to paper or something like that, and just kind of like a download, you're opening the envelope and what do they want to share? I just thought that would be a nice visual, that astral envelope from our loved ones. Jess, there's so much in your book, and thank you for sending me the PDF copy. And there's so many comforting words about your journey and the things that Asher has shared. Really comforting about living life. And I love that. Is there anything else you'd like to share from the book, or what's in the book, or tell us about ashertree.com?
Yeah, ashertree.com is our website. I say our website because although I do the writing on it, he sort of contributed to it telepathically. So, yeah, that's a good starting place if you want to know more about us. I do a newsletter once a month, which you can subscribe to on there, and just an email once a month. It's not selling anything, it's just sharing. Asher always does a little segment in that, which I download from him. And so there's always a bit from him. And then I tell people if I'm going to be doing an appearance, or if we're going to have, like, I'll put this interview on there when that's broadcast, so that people can link to it and have a look. So yeah, my website is pretty good. I'm just thinking if there's anything that Asher has said that would be a lovely thing to share. I think, can you just bear with me a second?
Yes, of course.
Here we are. I think, given your We Won't Die show, I'd just like to share something he said in a telepathic message to me recently. He said, I only shared a life with my mother for 9 years. That's a very short time. We had made an agreement when we made our life plans that she would leave early. And there were several reasons for that. One of those reasons was that you and I would get to know each other better, and you'd have a reason to stay in touch with me. But it also fitted her own plan to have a short life. And I said, yeah, but it was a terrible loss for you. And he said, yes, it was, but it needed to happen. Remember, I'd chosen to explore many aspects of telepathic communication. And she had much to teach us about that. And of course, the mediumship with her was what, sparked yet another layer of this amazing journey that he and I have been on. So even if loved ones do leave early, that is hard, desperately difficult as it seems. There's a reason, both for them and for oneself, for the people who are left behind. I think that's quite comforting.
It is. And we're always connected, and we're going to see them again. And there's so much power in slowing down and trusting and all of it. I'd like to remind our listener that your website is ashertree.com. The name of the book is A Mind Beyond Words, My Decades of Discovery with an Extraordinary Guide. Really, truly is a beautiful book with just so many gems of wisdom. So, Jess, thank you for being our guest here today.
You are so welcome. I have thoroughly enjoyed chatting to you, Sandra. It's been a delight.
I have too. And it's just a different story, but just shows all of us what's possible. We don't just try to communicate with our loved ones who are passed, but every human being is a divine soul, and we can connect on that soul to soul level. We have a new class on Wednesdays called Soul to Soul Communication. So if you've never dabbled in how your soul perceives information, I welcome anyone to join us. You can go to wedon'tdie.com. You can click on our at-home courses page. Of course, we have more in-depth medium classes as well, but it's extraordinary to feel that. And like I said earlier, you don't have to want to be a medium in the world, but when you start giving people what you think is your imagination and these random thoughts and feelings and maybe smells or tastes or songs come into mind, and you realize they belong to somebody else, to another soul that no longer walks this earth, it's pretty impressive as to who we are. And if you don't yet have a copy of my book, We Don't Die, and you'd like a free PDF copy, at the bottom of the page at wedon'tdie.com, just enter your name and email address. It says you get the first few chapters. The secret is it's the entire book. Chapter 10 is very powerful about grief and best ways to navigate through it. And there's also a chapter in there about remote viewing. So I give instruction how we can each quiet down, have that intention, whether we work with another person or, like I said earlier, you have a magazine that you have never opened before, and how quickly our soul can get that information. You don't ever have to do anything with it. It's just one of those experiences that that I'm more than just this body. I'm more than just this skin and bones. I am a divine soul connected to everything. So wedon'tdie.com is our home base. And if you love hearing stories about the afterlife, I have a second program on iHeartRadio called Shades of the Afterlife, where I'm a reporter on the afterlife. On We Don't Die, we just talk to one guest each episode. And on that show, I'm reporting in with all kinds of stories. So I think you'll enjoy that too. Again, wedon'tdie.com is the home base. And we have a free Sunday gathering, which I forgot to mention. It's a non-denominational service that happens 2 p.m. Eastern United States time, 7 p.m. UK time. And it's inspiring. It gives you power for your life. It's fun, it's joyful, and there's always a medium demonstration. So we get members from the spirit world who make contact with their loved ones, and it's miraculous just to see how close they are. Well, in closing, my name is Sandra Champlain, and I love being your host on We Don't Die Radio. I do believe that life is an education for the soul and that your life here on earth is important. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you again soon.